Hello and welcome back. Sorry for my voice, it's a little scraggly. I've been sick for quite a while, and for whatever reason, when I was sick, my brain was like, let's go through the entire vintage cube and go card for card what cards I would remove, and specifically what cards I would add to replace them. Um, I've done a couple things like this in the past, just like, oh, here's 10 cards I'd like to add, but it's not very helpful because it's easy just to say, oh, this should be in the cube. But finding cuts is the hard part, right? Because you got to work around archetypes, like what can you actually remove. So hopefully, going specifically what I would cut to what I would add is significantly more helpful. Maybe if someone who manages the Arena Cube or Vintage Cube is watching, they can get a couple cuts and adds from here, and we can get a more fun cube overall. Is the goal. A couple things here. I'm going like my dream cube is quite a bit different than the Magic Online Vintage Cube. Like I think Reanimator is not very fun, and I don't like the one card win conditions like Minsc and Boo, Fourth Earling Us, Psychic Frog. So like personally, I would cut all of those. But this is kind of just going under the assumption that people seem to like those cards. So for the Magic Online Cube, these cuts and replacements are just trying to highlight existing archetypes, rebalance some stuff, and add new archetypes to help the cube play better. So that's the goal, and hopefully we can get there. A lot of this analysis is going off of the data we have from the Magic Arena cube. Now, bear with me. I'm not going to show this graph for too long. We're going to talk mostly about cards, but 17 Lands released the full data set from like 280,000 games of Arena Cube, and we get all of it, so it's awesome. If you missed the data analysis, the main takeaway is that the Boros cards are absolutely crushing it. Like the best average performing deck card with Sanguine Evangelist. Like this whole cluster basically is Boros, and then this whole cluster here is kind of everything else. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this. This isn't the video to talk about that. I'll post more in-depth analysis. But basically, one takeaway is add more synergy requirements to the red and white aggro decks can help put them more in line with the rest of the decks, because right now the problem is there's so much redundancy. You could just play whatever cards and win. The other takeaway, so I'll try and explain this as quick as I can, more in depth with a later video, but the vertical axis of this graph is best high synergy cluster wins. The short answer is this is basically for each card we found the best possible archetype it can be in, and we looked at the 75th percentile of that archetype, basically cards that got 75% more cards that are correlated with a positive win rate in that archetype compared to the rest of the cards in that archetype. So this is just like for Tolarian Academy, the best high synergy wins was 3.99, which means the Tolarian Academy deck that got all of the things that it would want, you know, like a Mox, maybe like a Tinker, like all of those payoffs is winning on average 3.99 compared to like Galvanic Discharge. When this deck gets all the things that it's winning on average 4.57 rounds. So the main takeaway here is cards in this need a bit of help. Notably to me, Tolarian Academy was very shocking that the best Tolarian Academy decks were performing so poorly. So takeaway is Academy needs some help. And artifacts in general, like there's Urza is over here, Tinker's over here. These are all very much, this line is kind of what you would expect. So anything below this is underperforming, essentially. And then everything to the left is also underperforming. So just like Urza, Tinker, like Tolarian Academy, all those cards are doing poor, like worse than you would expect. A lot of the blue cards were doing poorly, needed some help. And then Reanimator too, but like Entomb, Torsten, Woodfall Primus, that kind of thing. But that's partially because Reanimator on Arena was undersupported, I think. So I'm not going to go too in depth into like fixing Reanimator. Yeah, Entomb being really low is quite rough. Anyway, that's kind of the thing. Add synergy to Boros, and then shore up the artifact deck, and then help blue and black a little bit. So the first, I'm gonna go color by color because that's the easiest. And blue, I don't have that many changes to blue because when you go through it, there's not that many cuts that you can make unless you want to completely overhaul the blue archetype. So for me, the first most obvious change is cutting Candelabra of Tawnos for Snap. Candelabra of Tawnos, actually. So this is the last graph I'm going to show, I promise. But Candelabra of Tawnos, this is the Tolarian Academy graph. So the vertical axis is the average impact other cards had on the win rate of Tolarian Academy decks. So if you look up here, Tinker, decks with Tolarian Academy that also have Tinker, on average, have a 0.097 higher win rate. It's like 10%. It's very high correlation. And then the x-axis is how often they appear indexed together. So people are playing, or it's not exactly that. It's the frequency within each archetype. So the archetypes that care about Tinker are playing Tinker a lot, essentially. We'll get into it a lot more when I post data analysis videos. But the takeaway here is Tinker's good with Tolarian Academy. That's what we're measuring. What is interesting, Candelabra of Tawnos has a net negative impact on Tolarian Academy. Now, it is small. It's a 0.5% negative impact on the win rate, but we have 1,161 decks and around 5,000 games of Candelabra plus Tolarian Academy. So you can say, statistical significance, whatever, but overall, it has a negative impact. And Candelabra is only in the cube for Tolarian Academy, and it's bad with Academy. Another one that I'll talk about later is Expedition Map. Actively bad to play in a Tolarian Academy deck. The cards that are good, if you're curious, it's like Tinker, Brain Freeze, Underworld Breach, Mishra's Workshop, Retrofitter Foundry, Mox Opal, Urza. Like the cards you would expect to be good are good. Mox Opal is good in Tolarian Academy decks. Urza, Saga, Ugin, Sowing Michael Spawn, Isika's Chariot, that kind of thing. But the takeaway here is, I've been fighting this card for a long time, and I finally can show that the data is in. Candelabra is so bad, it's not even good with the card it's supposed to be good with. Let's cut it from the dang cube and replace it with Snap. Snap is awesome for quite a few reasons. It's a free, bounce spell, but you can still live the dream with Tolarian Academy. You can snap something with an Academy in play, and now you get your mana back, and you can double Academy mana. So you get the same synergy ceiling as you have with Candelabra, but it's an interactive tempo play. You can play in other decks. It seems awesome to me. Bouncing things to hand for 0 mana is very helpful, especially turn 2. On your turn, your opponent has a 2-drop, you bounce it, and then you have 2 mana up, and then you can use your counter spell to counter it. Really can help blue decks get back the tempo they might lose. If they play Gut, right? Pre-combat, you can bounce Gut on turn 2 and still hold up counter magic for something else later on. Anyway, seems awesome. And then kind of to facilitate that, let's put in High Tide, Cut and Gush. Both of these cards care about having a lot of islands in your deck. High Tide gives you an entire new archetype. It's the best mana generation engine, I think, in Magic ever. Wild to me that it's not in the cube, but it's a pretty easy swap, right? Gush cares about having islands in play. Nobody's playing Gush. I love Gush, but my problem is I never... I don't open Gush and go, ooh, I want to take a bunch of islands just to play Gush. It's kind of if you're already in blue, you might take this as your 23rd card. High Tide is a card you open, and you're like, I'm going to build a deck around this because it's so incredibly powerful. And it's really good with Snap. Snap is... High Tide tends to be best in a tempo control deck that can instantly switch to combo finish. Snap's awesome there. You can go High Tide, Snap, have a ton of mana. It's awesome. I know people are going to say Candelabra is good with High Tide. It's really not in Cube. I know they play it in Legacy High Tide Constructed, but that's because they have 4 copies of High Tide. In Cube, you only really get 1 copy of High Tide. And so playing a card that is only good when you've already resolved your best card is just not worth it. And even in that case, you usually only have 4 lands, 5 lands in play. So Candelabra is 1 mana to add 5. It's not that good because with High Tide you have essentially infinite mana anyway. Right? If you have 6 lands, 5 lands out, you play High Tide, you're up to 8 mana. If you have Snap, suddenly you're up to... You spend 2, you get 4. You have 10 mana, Time Spiral, Frantic Search. Suddenly you have way more mana than you need. You don't need this card to be good with High Tide. Anyway, to facilitate that as well, Cutting Storm Chaser's Challenge for Seagate Stormcaller. Similar role, right? They're kind of there to let you Time Walk twice, Ancestral Recall twice, maybe Lightning Bolt twice. Stormcaller just plays a little bit nicer with High Tide because High Tide specifically you're trying to play multiple times in one turn. So if you go Stormcaller then High Tide, You get a bunch of mana. Of all these cuts, this is the one I care about the least, because this is similar. So if you ignore this, that's fine. But I think with Snap, Seagate Stormcaller is kind of cool too. You can play it, play Snap, get both of them essentially for free. And if you go High Tide, Stormcaller, Snap, that's also kind of sick. And then lastly, adding Mind's Desire over Otawara. Reason for cutting Otawara, I added a bounce spell, so cutting a bounce spell kind of makes sense. This is the lowest impact one. Mind's Desire is the best storm card. And this, like, literally, even if we cut these, just these 3 cards adds an entire archetype to the cube, and we're not missing any, like, big payoff cards. We have one card that's actively bad in the archetype it's supposed to be in, one card that it gets played very little, and one card that's not bad, but you're not excited about it, and you get a whole new archetype. Up next are the red cards. The main thing that I wanted to add to red is like the Goblin Welder, Goblin Engineer synergies, just to try and give the artifact deck more different directions to go, because right now there's like one artifact deck and it's get a bunch of blue mana. Oh well, like there's only, you can spend it on Urza activations or like upheaval. There's not too many different directions to go with an artifact deck. And when I was doing the cluster analysis, it's like big artifacts or play Storm are kind of the 2 archetypes. And I think that's maybe an issue. So just giving it a couple different directions to go. Goblin Welder, Goblin Engineer could be kind of cool. This has the added benefit of cutting just a few of the aggro cards. I think Rob Brother Rich out for Goblin Engineer is like one key aggro card, I guess. And then cutting Monstrous Rage for Experimental Synthesizer. Monstrous Rage, it might be good. I've hated on this card, but it did perform well in the data. But I think if the goal is to tune down, the red aggressive decks, which this is only playable in a red aggressive deck, it's fine cutting the super narrow card, even if it is better than I gave it credit for. So those would be the 2 or the 3 major changes, like cutting Sundering Eruption, which I believe was put in to kill Caracas. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. So cut that for Goblin Welder. And then you can go Goblin Welder, Goblin Engineer, Experimental Synthesizer. I'm adding a ton more artifacts. We'll talk about those later. Actually, probably next. And then cutting Grease Wench Goblin for Beaumont Courier just to get another artifact in there. Both have discard synergies. This one's slightly less good in terms of like hitting for damage, but then better in terms of synergy, discard, and potentially drawing you a lot of cards. So that's cool. And then lastly, just to help round out the discard archetype, Grove of the Burning Will is Punishing Fire. For a couple of reasons. One you might not expect, which is that Grove of the Burning Willow's Punishing Fire is really cool in a discard deck. Not even if you're casting it. It's just cool in a discard deck in general. Because you can just pay red to get a card back into your hand. So it's like building your own squee in a sense that you can just discard this every turn and you'll always get it back. The other thing is it's a cool way to give control decks a way to handle the aggro decks. A little bit of inevitability there. And it's just a fun combo. Like, people like drafting towards them. And the opportunity cost is quite low, right? You cut like one of the Gruul lands to add a Gruul land. You're not really missing much slots there. And then you're cutting like a Firebolt for Punishing Fire, which are both cards that do 2 damage and they can come back later in the game. Punishing Fire in particular, really good against like Guide of Souls, Ocelot Pride, that kind of thing. So even if you don't have the combo, this is just really good against some of the cards that were absolutely dominating the top win rates of the cube. And then lastly, Molten Vortex. This card is much better people give it credit for, I think. Obviously, Life from the Loam, I'm suggesting to add later on. I'll talk about that later. But it's also a reliable discard outlet, right? A lot of the discard cards, discard synergies just care about, did you discard a card? So being able to just go red, discard a card at any time is awesome. It's not exactly playable on its own. Maybe if you really are short on removal, you could play it. But the fact that it synergizes so well with discard payoffs means there's a lot of different ways you can play it. And this is much more castable than Seismic Assault. Seismic Assault, triple red's pretty hard to make work. But this one you can play it turn 1. You can play it like a control deck, ping small creatures. Like, this will also help punish some of the like low to the ground aggro decks. This kills Broadside Bombardiers and Gut. Fairly relevant, and you could just have it up. But then the synergy with Life from the Loam, and other discard payoffs makes it really interesting to me. And then Ox for Goldspan Dragon, just a little bit of synergy. This one, I like. This isn't a super important change, but it is just an option because Ox is awesome. Okay, this is probably the biggest shakeup that I would suggest. And it's so big that it actually spans two things. But white was the best deck by far. It was so strong. And obviously that's Arena Cube versus Magic Online Cube. But I think people just don't like drafting the white deck because it's very straightforward. Like you just play some creatures and attack. So I'm just suggesting some changes that could hopefully give white a little bit more of a synergy flair and help boost the artifact archetype, like give it more things to do. So this is just what I'm suggesting. First of all, the End Stone was the worst performing of the big artifact payoffs by far, at least of the ones that are still in the cube. So cutting that from Mindslaver with when we're running Goblin Welder, that kind of thing. Really iconic card. That card's a lot of fun. Cutting Crucible of Worlds because I'm adding Life from the Loam, which again we'll talk about later. For Lotus Bloom. And Lotus Bloom, I don't know why it's not showing it. Lotus Bloom might seem weird, but it's really, really good with Goblin Welder, Goblin Engineer, because you can discard it and then weld it into play. It's really sick synergy. So then you're getting all of these like merging of archetypes, right? You have a discard synergy, you have Goblin Welder synergy. It's now you have like this interesting storm build where if you suspend Lotus Bloom, you could get 6 mana in one turn with a Goblin Welder. Or if you have like Bazaar of Baghdad, Goblin Welder, you can like weld it a Lotus Bloom into play, turn 2 and go off. It's just so cool. And then it's just also somewhat traditionally good in Storm, but it's just nice with the welders in the cube. You have this really powerful plan B for this card. Because when you draw it on turn 5, it normally sucks. But if you got, Goblin Engineer in play, you're very happy about it. Expedition map being cut because, again, really the only deck that cared about it so much was Tolarian Academy, and it was actively bad to include in a Tolarian Academy deck, at least according to the data. So cutting it. The fact that it wasn't good, right? Even if it's neutral with Tolarian Academy, why play it? It doesn't impact your win rate at all. Let's just cut it for a good card that you can play that's fun. So Scrawling Crawler, again, it's a card advantage card. It's just an artifact that's cool and does stuff. Whenever opponent draws a card, the player loses 1 life. You can play it in the archetype that people tend to like, which is like the Wheel of Fortune, Orcish Bowmaster's deck. This is just one additional piece to put there, but then it's also kind of aggressive, so it's really cool that way. Some of these aren't quite lined up, but I would cut Leyline Binding for Phyrexian Revoker, personally, because Phyrexian Revoker is awesome. It stops mocks, activated abilities, planeswalkers. It's like the most efficient way answer to a Minsc and Boo type of thing. Leyline Binding is cool, but it's just, you got to cut removal for removal somewhere. I think, yeah, these aren't exactly lined up, but this whole column I would cut for this column. Ademi, it's just like an aggro creature that's good in aggro. It does have some interesting like play to it, but it doesn't have much interesting synergy. I want to add Cranial Plating. So, like, we're not removing aggro from the cube, just giving it a different direction to go, which is artifacts. Similarly, I would think this is the cut here. Like, Sarah Paragon. Again, this is kind of a 4-mana 3/4 card that just says, if it's in play, you get value. It's fine. It's not like it's a bad card, but Stonecoil Serpent, really good Tolarian Academy payoff. Pretty decent aggro card, lets you get value off Mishra's Workshop. Like, putting all these cards in the cube make Workshop so much better. You could turn 1 Scrawling Crawler off of Mishra's Workshop. That sounds awesome. So I would add that. Containment Construct is this cool, like, branching of synergies between the discard deck and the artifact deck. This is probably one of the best discard payoffs, right? So if we had to cut the Root Wallows to add Containment Construct, I'm here for it. I would suggest cutting Samwise the Stout-Hearted, which is very similar. This one cares about stuff that died, which is sometimes harder to trigger than stuff that's discarded. But that's the change I would make. And then Descendant of Storms should be for this. For Esper Sentinel. This card's just good. It's an artifact. Have you ever seen Esper Sentinel with Cranial Plating? You're just going to draw cards. Like, that's pretty awesome. And then Ranger Captain, I would cut for Digsite Engineer. This gives you constructs that are huge. Like, just such an easy way to grow a massive army. Love this card. This card's a lot of fun. And then Figure of Destiny, cut for Hangerback Walker, just more good artifacts. We'll talk about, we're adding Arcbound Ravager, so this is really good with that. And then Mutagenic Growth for Michiko's Reign of Truth. Um, Maybe not the best one-to-one swap because this is kind of colorless and this is white, but you know, you could do something like, if you really cared about color parity, cut a colorless card to add a colorless card and then cut a white card to add a white card. You know what I mean? Like, but this card's crazy. It's cranial plating with art enchantments too, and it triggers immediately, so like it has haste, and then it flips into a Nettle Cyst, basically, and it's nuts. To better facilitate the artifact deck, I would cut all of the talismans. And I know I said I wouldn't show a graph, but I actually forgot. This is very important. First, quickly, this is the Tolarian Academy graph again. If we look at all of the talismans have negative win rate impact with Tolarian Academy. Talisman, talisman, talisman. All of the like Coalition Relic, talisman, talisman, talisman. All of the like clunky add mana cards were actively bad with Tolarian Academy. And then if we go back to this graph overall, like all of the talismans are also in this like bottom left, really low win rate and low potential cluster. Not all of them. There's some over here, but even then, like Talisman of Unity, it's still in the bottom left section of the cube. So they didn't perform very well. Subjectively, I just don't think they do that much. Like I often take them and I'm like, oh, maybe I'll play them, and then I cut them because the cube is all about 3-drops now, and you don't have time to plan for a big 4. So talismans are kind of in this weird spot where they're off curve of where most decks want to be playing them. And one thing that cutting the talismans does is it lets green shine in the thing that it does, right? Because if you have 10 talismans, any color can get access to ramp anytime they want. And it makes green a lot worse for that because then green has nothing special. So if we cut all the talismans, green gets its special thing back, which is accelerating you with mana elves. So then green can do the thing that it's excited about. And then we get to add all these other cool cards, like Patchwork Automaton, Springleaf Drum, Arcbound Ravager, Ichor Wellspring, Scrapwork Mutt, Scrap Heap Scrounger, Steel Overseer, Memnite, Porcelain Legionnaire, Collector's Vault. Just a lot of cool, fun cards. This isn't like the most optimized list. I think Memnite, the Scrap Heap Scrounger I'm not so sure about, but a lot of these are like really clutch artifacts. So you could find, like, if you wanted Hollow One instead, like you could totally make that switch. But here's like my first list of 10 that I thought was pretty cool cards to add. So anyway, yeah, definitely cutting the talismans to add all of these is what I would do. I think it would add a very interesting aggressive deck that you can play in blue, you can play in red, you can play in white. Just a lot more things to do with artifacts because they clearly need the help. Okay, next we got the black cards. The most important swap is to put Lethal Scheme back in the queue. We have a discard archetype. Lethal Scheme is like the sickest card ever with discard synergies. It's such a good card in general. And Baleful Mastery is like a fairly replaceable, you know, whatever removal spell. So put this back in the queue. That's the easiest swap. Next, I don't like Urborg because it's just so low value. Like nobody's first picking Urborg. You're basically only taking Urborg if you're in black and there's nothing else in the pack that you care about. To me, that card's not very interesting. You could put something like the Raven Man. So a lot of these cards in black are motivated by the fact that currently Hogak is almost impossible to play in a black deck, either because black doesn't really care about discarding, or there's just not enough like creatures that make tokens to let you convoke out a Hogak. So Raven Man is just an attempt at like fixing that. Because it's each end step, and there's a lot of like asynchronous discard stuff that you could like Bazaar on your turn, trigger Raven Man, and then do something on their turn, trigger Raven Man, then untap and like Thoughtseize them, trigger Raven Man. Seems pretty cool. Activated ability doesn't really come up, but it's kind of like a Bitter Blossom that can go much bigger because you can trigger it twice per turn. Anyway, this comes into play, makes a token, you can play Hogak. Seems pretty cool. Cryptcaller Chariot. This is this goes crazy. If you have Bazaar of Baghdad with this out, you make 3 zombies every time you discard. Like, it's kind of nuts. And it seems like a similar niche as Grave Titan, but 2 mana cheaper and way more like upside potential play Crypt Crawler Chariot, Wheel of Fortune makes 7 zombies. They do enter tapped, so I could see this being not as good as it looks, but it looks really good, so I would at least try it. Necrogoyf, I think this, I would probably, if I was like ranking these, I think Necrogoyf is an amazing card in a cube that has discard stuff, because it's a Goyf. Power equal number of creature cards in all graveyards. This could be like a 10 power creature very easily. And then at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player discards a card. So if you play it and then they are tapped out, they untap and kill it, they still have to discard a card and you're up a card in the exchange. And then if it comes around to your turn, you likely can afford to discard because you're playing the synergy or that deck. So you discard and it keeps going. So it's kind of like Smokestack in that just at its base value, the card is playable because they have to do the thing first. So you're always kind of up a card on average with this card. It has Madness, so you can get discard for free, and it's huge. It seems awesome to me. Basim for Sneaky Snacker. This one not super important to have in the cube. I don't know how easy it is to trigger outside of Bazaar. So this one's just if we need even more ways to put Hogak into play. I would cut Basim for Sneaky Snacker, but not the highest value. I'll put this like up here maybe. If we're rating them by cost. Desecrate Gift of Servitude for Bloodghast. I think my issue here is that this is a card that signals that black cares about discarding and has ways to let you discard reliably. There's like 3 or 4 ways in the cube for black to discard, and they're all removal. So you can only do it if your opponent has stuff you want to kill. So what black is missing is enablers or stuff like that. Like basically this is weird that it's in black because you want to have your discard payoffs be essentially colorless. Like Sneaky Snacker is basically a colorless card. And then the card I'm suggesting, Bloodghast, this is also effectively a colorless card because you can just play this in red discard. You can play this in blue discard. It doesn't matter what color you're in, whereas this locks you into a color pairing that actually doesn't care that much about discard. Red cares a lot about discard, and black doesn't at all. So removing this for something that's just generally good, one of the best ways to convoke a Hogak, makes sense to me. Just a personal vendetta. Cabal Ritual is like the least useful card in the cube. And replacing it with a card that's a very similar role player, Deadly Dispute. Like you can make treasure tokens, really good in Storm, which is like Cabal Ritual, you're only playing it in Tendril Storm. And I think Deadly Dispute's probably better in the Tendril Storm deck, personally. Another option, I guess, could be actually cutting Knight's Whisper for Deadly Dispute, if it'll show up here. I could totally see this also being a good swap, this for this, because this is instant, makes a treasure token, it does a lot of stuff. This, you know, maybe that's the real swap. But anyway, lastly, Cutting Cecil. To me, it is a very replaceable, underperforming card. Oh, uh-oh, we've moved. Very replaceable, underperforming card that, you know, it's fine. Putrid Imp, if we do want a discard archetype, there's like another great way to get Hogak out. Goes crazy with Crypt Crawler Chariot, the Raven Man. Really good way to just fill your graveyard for decks that care about it. And this card's pretty good in Reanimator too. Like this is a card that has been played in Vintage Cube exclusively for Reanimator. Now that the cube is getting discard payoff, discard synergies, it gets much better because you could play it in like an aggressive, like discard deck, right? You could play Putrid Imp and the Raven Man and Bloodghast and a Hogak, and it's kind of sick. Okay, and lastly, there's green. I split green into 2 piles. One is stuff that like I think is a pretty easy swap, and the next is green needs help, and I'm just trying stuff, but I don't. Those might not work. So the first for me, let's get Gitrog Monster and Life from the Loam in the cube. These are the 2 like sickest cards to have in a cube that cares about discard. You could have Putrid Imp, Gitrog Monster, Bloodgat, like all that stuff is so sick. Really good with Life from the Loam if you dredge. Dredge Loam with Gitrog Monster in play can draw you like a ton of cards. Just cool. White of the Reliquary is a card. Doesn't see much play. Not very good. Although I will say, with Bazaar of Baghdad, this card might get better. So there could be other cards to find for cuts for the Gitrog Monster, but as it stands, I wouldn't miss this card. I just think things that tutor up lands, it's just really slow. That's kind of where I'm at with this. So this is sick. Crucible for Life from the Loam. Life of Loam was awesome with Molten Vortex. It's really good with Bazaar of Baghdad on its own because you can loam back lands and then dredge loam off Bazaar and then loam back lands. This is like Squee if Squee drew 3 cards instead of 1. So you can become card positive with Bazaar and loam, which is so sick. I think that's very powerful. I would cut Talon Gates for Rishid and Port. Rishid and Port, we've took some things away from the aggro decks, give them something back. This card is incredible. And then Gruff Triplets, as far as I'm aware, this works with Flash. And this card is nuts. It's 6 mana instead of 7 from Vault One Tyrant. So you can hardcast this, and it is worth hardcasting because it is 6 mana. When it enters, you get 2 tokens that are copies of it. And then when it dies, you put a number of counters equal to the power in each creature you control named Gruff Triplets. So base rate, 6 mana for 9 trample power across 3 creatures. If one of them dies, you will end up with 2 6/6 tramplers. If they kill one of your 6/6 tramplers, you will get 1 12/12 trampler. So if you flash in Gruff Triplets, maybe people in the comments can correct me. If it doesn't work with Flash, I wouldn't put it in the cube. But I'm pretty sure you can stack the triggers. So you flash it in, it enters and then it dies. And you make it create the tokens first, and then put counters on the tokens, and you basically get 2 6/6 tramplers for 2 mana, whereas this gives you 1 6/6 trampler. You do get to draw a card, but I'd rather have 2 6s than 1. And if they kill the 6/6, you get a 12/12 that kills them even faster. It's a ridiculous magic card. It's really good to natural order into. Honestly, I would hardcast this, be pretty happy about it. This card's just sick. Maybe it can help green. And then the last section of green are just cards that I think might help, but I don't feel particularly strongly about. Cutting Yavimaya for similar reason is why I think Urborg sucks. Like, Nissa Who Shakes the World doesn't need this card. Raphaelos isn't in the cube, so this is just kind of minor fixing. I don't know. Green mostly cares about hitting green on turn 1 anyway, right? And so this isn't any better than a forest at casting like Llanowar Elves on turn 1. It helps your opponent. Like, it's just weird. It's not very exciting. It's not bad, but like it's like a 15th pick that you might just put in because you're in green. It's not great. So cutting that for Garrick, who's just awesome. Actually, I think I wanted to cut Ouroboros for Garrick. Because Garrick, his overrun gives trample, whereas Ouroboros does not give trample. So like the play pattern with Garrick is you play it, uptick it, get mana back, and then the next turn you just give your creatures +3/+3 and trample and you kill them. It's not weak to removal like Ouroboros is, and it makes beasts. It's just a sick card. Really good. Another thing that you can do with Tellurian Academy besides Candelabra. Just sick. Archsteward's Charm, to me, reads good. This is a card I haven't cast, which is why it's in the like maybe it'll help pile. But it's instant speed, tutor creature land. You can tutor, Bazaar if you care about that. You can tutor Thespian Sage Dark Depths stuff. Puts the land into play. So you could, it's kind of like another crop rotation variant that isn't card disadvantage, but it can also tutor any creature you care about. And it's exile artifact or enchantment. Oh, that's what it was. I would cut Force of Vigor for Archdruid's Charm. Artifact and enchantment removal, but it's more flexible, whereas Force of Vigor, it's really good against the decks that need help. Like the artifact deck is already struggling. Why do we need another Force of Vigor just to like punish them? I don't know. I would. This is similar, but it's not as all in on killing a deck that's struggling. And then it has other modes you can use it to fight, that kind of thing. Courser of Krufix, kind of boring. Whatever. I think I would make this swap. Cut Courser of Krufix for Conduit of Worlds. Some synergy in the lands deck, but again, you can play lands from your graveyard. Now synergy with the discard theme. If you Molten Vortex with this out, right, you spend all of your mana discarding lands, and then you can play them from a graveyard. And then this thing just lets you play stuff from your graveyard every turn. It's nuts. It doesn't exile. You just keep playing things from your graveyard over and over and over again. It's ridiculous. And then lastly, Fauna Shaman. If discard is staying, discard is just good. And I think Yavimaya is not great. But I don't feel very strongly about Fauna Shaman. It's cool. Like, I play it and I like it. But it's not like going to make or break the cube. So anyway, that's pretty much all of the cards that I would change in the cube. Starting with just adding High Tide, Snap, Mind's Desire. Those three are very important for that archetype. Getting Goblin Engineer, Goblin Welder in the cube with the discard synergy, I think, is really high impact. Suggesting to cut the talismans to add artifact creatures, and all of that synergy is great. You could even, right, if you don't want to cut white cards for colorless cards, if you care about like color balance, you could probably find, right, this is like 6. You could probably find 6 cards in here. Well, actually, no, because there's 4 white cards. So you would just find 2 that you don't care about. Maybe, 2 from here. Maybe we don't want Memnite. Yeah, because there's 4 here. It doesn't really matter what these are. I'm just trying to make them line up. Maybe you don't want Memnite, and maybe like Scrap Heap Scrounger is too much, and maybe Eager Wellspring's too much. So you could 1 for 1. Oh, this is so sick. Wait, this is much better than what I did before. If you care about color parity, right? We're just missing Enduring Innocence. That's okay though. Anyway, if you care mostly about color parity, you can get a pretty sick artifact creature swap by cutting a couple white cards, adding some white cards that care about artifacts, and then cutting the talismans, and you get all of these sick cards to build like 2 whole new archetypes in the cube by cutting these cards that go very late picks and they're not that exciting. And then for black, just helping it care more about discard a little bit. Mostly it's like Lethal Scheme and Necrogoyf Bloodghast are the few that are like super awesome and easy. Putrid Imp is cool. Deadly Dispute, I think, is for Night's Whisper is a very interesting. This is an interesting swip to me. I thinking of it in real time. That is interesting. And then green, give us the frog, give us Life from the Loam. Those are the main things I care about. Thanks for watching. If you have any thoughts, let me know. Probably rambled for quite a while here, but I thought maybe it was helpful. And maybe we could see some of these changes and be a lot of fun. See you guys next time.